Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Candace Beers. I'm the manager of communications here at Communitech. If you don't know, member companies at Communitech scale faster than anywhere else in Canada. If you're not a member yet, we can certainly help you fix that. There's a website on your screen now. I have the great pleasure of moderating, sort of co-moderating today's AMA with Conway Fraser. Today's AMA is on how CEOs should, but also how they shouldn't handle crisis situations. So before we get started and we get into introductions, I wanted to give a bit of a recap on some housekeeping items. So number one, today's session is being recorded. We ask that you please keep your mic on mute. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, this is an AMA, so asking questions is a big part of it. Please do so in the chat feature. This session is meant to provide general guidance. If you have any specific questions for Conway, Matt, or myself, we'll share details on how you can connect with us after the session has wrapped. Our next AMA, for those who aren't yet aware, is on designing your funding roadmap. So debt, equity, and bootstrapping takes place next Tuesday at 2 p.m. as well. I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who will introduce Conway.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. See a lot of friendly faces out there, both from Communitech member companies, some folks from the public policy space here in Ontario. It's exciting to get to connect with you all today. So as Candace said, I'm Matt Bondi. I'm Vice President for External Relations at Communitech, and I'm pleased to co-moderate this alongside Candace. I would say that journalism and our kind of featured guest this afternoon is himself an award-winning journalist. I would say that journalism is primarily about three things. Good journalism provokes, informs, and entertains. And so my hope and my trust is that we're going to get to do all three of those things today. And you're a big part of that. So Candace is going to be managing the chat room community there. So fire away with your questions, your hypotheticals, your horror stories. Let's talk about crisis communications and how CEOs and leaders should handle them and how they shouldn't handle them. Extra points if you share an embarrassing story to that effect. So listen, I'm going to introduce Conway Fraser a little bit here. I've got a list of credentials and achievements in front of me from Conway that I think his mother put together. So I'm just going to give you a sampling of them so you get the gist. Conway is a Gemini Award-winning investigative journalist formerly with the CBC. He's co-author of Leaders Under Fire, which means he literally wrote the book on CEO crisis communications alongside his co-author Jeff Chatterton. He's a strategic advisor to CEOs in business, executive directors in nonprofits, cabinet ministers in government, and most importantly, he's a senior advisor to Communitech and to you. So Conway is part of Team Communitech. He's an advisor both to us on the management side, but he's also here as an advisor to you. And I see a lot of friendly faces of folks who've had the opportunity to work with Conway a little bit already. And know that if you're coming up with some CEO or leadership level reputational challenges, Conway's here. He works with and for Communitech, and we'll get you some time with him. So just follow up with us and know that this is a resource that's at your disposal. So with that, what I might like to do here is just open it up to Conway to say a few words about what we're doing here and what we'd like to accomplish. And the main thing I want to leave you with before turning it over to Conway and then back to Candace to start generating some questions in the chat is let's have fun. If we're not having fun today, we did it wrong. So let's have a good time. And with that, over to Conway.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt and Candace. I mean, at the end of the day, if crisis isn't funny, I don't know what is. But people who work in this field or people who've worked in journalism, I see our old friend Tony Reinhardt there, and there's a support group for former journalists in Kitchener-Waterloo. And I know Kevin's on there too. And it's a dark sense of humor group. So I hope I don't offend anybody today with my dark sense of humor. If I do, there's a disclaimer at the bottom of the invite. I think Candace was supposed to put there. I think, you know, at the end of the day, Matt hit the nail on the head. We really do need your questions. I mean, I don't want this to be a lecture. Matt knows, Candace knows, like I get pretty boring after about 3 minutes lecturing. So probably best to get involved in anecdotes and stories. I think one thing that I'll say off the top as an honest disclaimer is that this that I do, a lot of you have scientific backgrounds, tech backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, coding, all that kind of stuff. What I do and what a lot of us do is not a science. It very much is an art. It's based on experience. So you're going to hear some things today that you may disagree with, and you should. This is based on my experience and what I've done and the work that I've done. There are a lot of people who work in crisis communications who are excellent. There are some who aren't, but there are many who are very, very good at it. And so there's not any one right answer. There's just experiences that we share, lenses. At the end of the day, when I advise clients, I tell them I'm giving advice, but at the end of the day, you're the one that has to make the decision. You're the one that has to weigh off everything. And so, every crisis is like a fingerprint or a thumbprint. Everyone is slightly different. There's no one that's the same. And so it was difficult even to write a book because every experience is different. And anyway, so that's what I would use as a bit of an opener. Kidding aside, let's have a little bit of fun with it. I know Matt has his sword ready to go, and there may be some jousting going on, but I look forward to engaging with y'all today.
Absolutely. So I noticed a couple of comments in the chat that there's a bit of an echo. It might be me, guys. If it stopped while I stopped talking, it's me. So I'll see what I can do when I have a minute. Hopefully it's not too terrible. Listen, Conrad, while we get folks generating questions about experience that they have had or that they want to maybe get ahead of in their kind of line of business, why don't you tell us a little bit about, since you've been working with Communitech for about maybe a year now, tell us a little bit about some of the common denominator challenges you're seeing our member companies and companies in the tech space come to you with. What are some of the common features? And I think that might help folks to get a sense of, what I'm afraid to talk about is normal. Like this happens to other CEOs as well.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, a common denominator that I see increasingly, and I've been doing this since I left the CBC 12 years ago, and I've noticed in the past few years that a common theme that I'm seeing is an increasing level of fear and trepidation and a desire to want to respond by companies to things that are said on social media, often anonymous, sometimes not. But it's about assessing sort of the risk level, the tolerance level, the truth level. But I often get calls. I jokingly tell people social media has been great for business because I get calls from people who are like, we have a really bad review on Google. We need your help. I'm like, that's not really what I do. And we've got like 8 executives in a boardroom talking about this. I'm like, you guys need a hobby because you should not be spending a lot of time on this. And I don't want to diminish things that are said on social media, but often with companies, when something happens on social media and people start reacting internally, the first thing I tell executives is understand everybody's looking at you right now. Internally, everyone is looking at you. And it's important as an executive to be calm, be controlled, and approach this like you approach any other problem. And you don't want to ignore it and you don't want to downplay it, but let's assess it from a reality perspective and say, what is this? First of all, if it's anonymous, what does it mean? Do you have a problem that you actually have to deal with? I would say, Matt, honestly, 90% of the time, it's just someone going on a bend, saying something on social media and moving on. And the bigger problem is internal if people start spiraling. But often with social media, I chuckle because it's created an environment where everyone has a voice and everyone has a lens, and those are good things. But on the crisis side, it can also be challenging if you have anybody who's involved today who have been the subject of an attack on social media. It can be very, very challenging. I would say though that often not flying off the handle when you get that and just approaching it from a fact-based decision point of view is probably the best advice. But that's a trend that I have seen increasingly in the past couple of years, to the point where someone else should write a book on that. It won't be me, but there is a book to be written there.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. We've got some questions coming in, so I'll toss to Candace in a minute, give folks a chance to add any others they might see fit. But you said something interesting about an often forgotten audience in the context of crisis is the internal audience. And it's like they say in media, they won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think that kind of bearing that executives can bring both to their publics, but also their domestic constituencies is often a forgotten constituency. And I'd be interested if any CEOs have any, or community members here have any experience with that. What I might do now, let's toss to Candace. We've got a couple of questions here that Candace can curate for us.
Definitely. I would love to start with the no comment strategy. When is no comment the right strategy? Is it ever an appropriate strategy? And when is it not the right route to go on the crisis planning?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is I tell people, I think no comment is an acceptable approach when you're in handcuffs being led to prison. And that's about it. George Carlin, a famous comedian, anybody under the age of 40 will have to Google him, but quite funny. He used to say, no comment is a comment. And it is, because think about it. When you hear someone in the news say no comment, or someone just doesn't comment, they allow something to go unresponded to, what do you think? As a viewer, as a listener, as a member of the public, you think, oh, they're hiding something, or they're worried, or now, I'm not saying you have to get out there. There are times when you can't comment. Perhaps it's a legal matter. Perhaps it's a human resources issue. You can't go out and talk about, an employee who's criticizing, they can do what they have to do, but you can't go out and talk about human resources issues. But there are things that you can say. And I typically say when you cannot speak about the specifics of an issue, you can always revert to three things: policy, procedure, and past practice. And those are three things that you can always talk to. So for example, you can say, look, unfortunately, that's a human resources issue. There are privacy rules and laws. We're unable to speak to that, but here's what I can tell you. And then say something. Don't say nothing. Say something. Explain why you can't comment, and then get into your policies and procedures and maybe some data points that indicate that you're actually a company that has a favorable internal employee rating or something like that. There always is something you can say. I find, sorry, go ahead.
No, Conrad, just let's go back for the team here and just recap those three things that you can say when you've got a crisis you can't robustly speak into. So folks walk out with some really actionable kind of knowledge here.
Yeah. Well, so, it's pretty simple if you think about it. Think about your organization or your company. If there's maybe there's a lawsuit. Let's use that. It's the most typical. Someone's suing you, right? Or there's been an accident. So three things that you can always talk about without violating any rules. Your policies. So what are your policies on the issue? What are your procedures, and what is your past practice? So for example, do you have any metrics or indicators that suggest that, maybe you've won some awards as an organization for, being a great company or being a place that people want to work? We're using some kind of ambiguous examples, but they always tend to be typically either HR or legal for the most part.
Absolutely.
Or possibly involving investors and money and stuff like that. But the idea of saying nothing is an automatic response from many executives because they think it's the safest approach, and legally it is. And quite often they're lawyers, and I don't want to bash lawyers. Lawyers are a very important part of the corporate team, but often from a legal perspective, the safest thing in a court of law is to say nothing. That is the best approach. And your lawyer will say, no, let's say nothing. And then I usually come in and say, well, there's this other court, and it's called the Court of Public Opinion. And the Court of Public Opinion will charge you, it will try you, it will convict you, and it will sentence you in 24 to 48 hours. And so, will you even have a company or a job when that thing goes to court? And that's the other thing I tell executives. Usually most companies can survive. But as an executive, often there's someone who gets thrown to the angry volcano gods. And who's the person getting thrown to the angry volcano gods? Because I've been brought into crisis before where it's very, very late in the process. You know, the crap has already hit the fan. There's been the coverage, and they call and say, come in and save the day. And I'm like, look, at this point, you know, we may lose an arm and a leg, or we're going to try to just keep you alive. And the arm and the leg is usually like a couple of executives. And it's usually the call I get from the board. When I get a call from a board chair, I know shit's gone sideways. It's like, uh-oh. They basically, you know, they want
DEFCON 4.
Yeah, it's like, all right. What was the word phrase used before? Broken arrow. Okay.
Broken arrow. That's right. You know, it's important to remember those kind of top of mind 3 plays that you can make in situations where you can't say much. And, you know, I think the other challenge with a no comment response, I'll toss it back to Candace to have some more questions in. No comment concedes narrative control, doesn't it? Where you can maintain some semblance of narrative control if you say something and try to move the story in a direction. But Conway, if you say nothing at all, you are removing yourself from the conversation and losing any control whatsoever.
Yeah, well, you're allowing the narrative to be filled with rumor and speculation, and other people are defining your company or you as a leader. And I get it. Sometimes there are things you just can't say, but saying nothing is such a bad option. Like, it takes a little bit of hard work to develop those talking points, but they're worth it. And I want to double back to something that we talked about earlier, which is social media, because the no comment thing and the social media thing are now going to come together, which is, it's very, very difficult when your house is on fire and you're getting attacked and the board chair is calling you, asking what's going on, and investors are calling and employees are calling, and you have to sit down and write out a statement. Yeah.
That is the perfect segue to one of the questions that I think we've got popping up. Can you put it up for us?
For sure. So we've got 2 questions in the chat right now. The first one that I was going to throw to, that I'm worried is not one you wanted me to, is while each crisis is unique, what's a rinse and repeat template or approach that you would recommend companies start adopting as, you know, new crises start appearing for them?
So I think what I'll do is I'm going to put a pin in that one. We will come right back to it. I want to jump to one that was perfectly pegged to Conway's earlier comments from Janine Scott, one of our friends at the Tannery.
Awesome. So Janine is asking for some advice on proactive approaches to crisis communications. Do you typically suggest that companies identify risks and discuss plan approaches? Sometimes teams don't like to discuss things that aren't issues yet.
Yeah. So great question, and it does kind of come out of what we were talking about earlier. The fact of the matter is that as a company or an organization, you can get together right now in what I call peacetime. You can get together and you can anticipate probably a solid 80% of the potential issues you may face. Now, you're going to hear me use a couple different phrases: issues and crisis. Crisis happens when you've not controlled your issues. So it starts with issues management, and then it evolves into crisis. And so when it's at an issue level or even a potential issue level, what I always tell clients is, look, sit down and start brainstorming creatively as a group as to what are the potential things that we could face as a company. And sometimes you can look to other people in your sector, in your space, to see what challenges have they faced. Okay, let's apply those to ours. And what you can do then is you can write out holding statements. So a holding statement is something when things hit the fan and the media are calling, it's something that you can send out to hold them, hence why it's called a holding statement. It'll buy you not a ton of time, but it might buy you a half day or a day, right? It's allowing you to say something in the media versus the no comment, or versus, you know, Matthew Bondi did not return our calls, you know, Communitech is not speaking at the moment. At least you're not saying that. So you develop these holding statements. You can get your lawyer to look at them during peacetime. You can flip them to the board chair. The board chair can go, I like those. There's going to be some templates in there. You're going to have some sections highlighted in yellow that you're going to have to populate based on the specifics. But an accident is an accident. A financial accusation is a financial accusation. You know, a harassment allegation is a harassment allegation. There's a lot of different things that are very customizable based on specifics, but you could come up with like 10 templated scenarios, write your holding statements, and even write a one-pager of talking points that speak to your policies, your procedures, and your past practices at minimum. And the customization deals with the actual situation. You can do that now. Anybody can do that. You don't need to hire somebody like me. You can all do that.
Absolutely. But the reason guys like you are around is because most people won't. Now, maybe on this AMA will, but how many people are really good about fixing their roof when the sun's out? You know, how many countries really prepare for pandemics while everybody seems to be doing okay? Not too many. But to your point about having almost a templated look at issues and crises before they happen, we've got a perfect question for you here from our colleague Grady Meston in Waterloo Region. Candace, can you serve that one up to us? It looks really interesting. Oh, you're on mute. I'm just going to help you out.
While each crisis is unique, is there a rinse and repeat template or approach that you take as each new crisis arises or falls on your lap?
And before we get into Conway's response here, and I want to, because I've worked with Conway on some of this before, Candace, with your work with our PR companies, or with our, in PR for our member companies, you've done a lot of this work as well. And so I'd be really interested in hearing from you, what common denominators you see that, you know, what can people do next week, specifically in this community that you work in, and you provide a lot of leadership and mentorship to our member companies as well.
What can people start doing? So I think for me, the approach that I always take is threefold. So always think through your audience and what you want each of those audience members to feel, like we discussed. And then I like to think through what do we know and what don't we yet know? And I like to make sure that we have as much of a balance between those two things in whatever holding statement that is put together as possible, because there's always going to be things that you do know and things that you don't. Crises are never solved in minutes. It's usually days, weeks, and sometimes, unfortunately, and it takes time to gather the information that you need in order to, you know, settle in the court of public opinion.
Well, Candace, I mean, we'll throw over to Conway now, but you hit on something that he trains people to do, I think, which is you always include, you know, what you know and what you don't know, and that kind of pat response that maybe Conway can talk a little bit about.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that come up, because often people typically in a crisis or an issue, they will communicate, here's what we know for fact, here's what we're doing, and here's what will happen next. That's, most people do that. That's pretty operational. It's that one, here's what we don't know or can't say, that is one that often people forget. And why I like that, and we've got a few former journalists, I know Tony's there too. There's nothing worse than doing a news conference or doing an interview, and at the end of it, especially in an issue situation, at the end, the reporters start peppering you with questions. Well, what can you say about this? Well, we're not sure about that. What about this? I don't know. I can't say that right now. What about this? I can't say that. So no one can say, I don't know 6 or 8 times in a row without it impacting the perception of their credibility. The way to address that when you're dealing with an issue or a crisis, just to say, to Candace's point, so here's what we know for fact. Here's what we don't know or we can't say, and explaining why you can't say it. Then here's your actions, and then here's what's happening next. And why that's important is because when you get to the end, at minimum, if the reporters are re-asking questions you've already answered, you can say, well, as I alluded to earlier in my statement, we're unable to speak to that right now because it's a human resources issue, and or whatever the situation is. But I think it takes away a lot of the steam associated with being peppered with questions that you have to say no to. I mean, I'm going to call an audible here. Tony Reinhardt's here, and I know he's a part of the Communitech team. Tony, I hope you combed your hair for this. Turn on your microphone, but you were a reporter. What's it like, for you when you were a journalist at the Globe and Mail or Waterloo Record and peppering people with questions, and it was just no, no, no all the time?
Well, point of order first, reporters generally don't comb their hair very often. Well, it's very much as you described. If you keep getting the no over and over and over again, you kind of feel as the reporter, you're just there to record the no. And oftentimes, going into those situations that no is what you're going to get, but you're there basically doing your due diligence as a journalist to get the no on the record. But a lot of the work around a story like that then gets done away from that situation. And that's where, as you alluded to earlier, the narrative can be defined by people other than yourself. And that's always dangerous. So if you're a reporter confronted with someone just saying, I can't answer, I can't talk, or no comment or whatever, you're going to go to other people. You're going to sort of go in concentric rings from that person to get the information that you need to put a story together. And you're basically, if you're the person at the center of this issue, you're at the mercy of those people in those concentric rings and whether or not they're actually the type of people you want to be speaking to your issue.
And I found, Tony, when I was reporting, and we were reporting around the same time, that if somebody came out and explained something they couldn't speak to proactively, but most importantly, explained why they couldn't, it just landed better with me. It felt like they weren't trying to hide something. If it was like, well, we can't speak to that because, there's a process, there's a legal process going on, and actually we're not allowed to speak to it. And it's like, oh, okay, understandable, versus just, I'm not telling you that.
Yeah, I would also add that the degree to which somebody just says no and doesn't tell you why is often proportional to the amount of digging that reporter is going to do. So if
absolutely, like Tony, that's catnip to you guys.
Exactly.
I'm a journalist here. I need to get the facts out. So that's almost going to be read to a bull. And it's so funny. Like we talk about media relations.
There's a whiff all of
excuse me, I think I have a brief delay, but we talk about media relations, and the word's right in there, but we do kind of forget it sometimes. Relationships, right? We should be having relationships with people in media who cover us or who don't cover us. And when we can be helpful, just try to be helpful and be a human being. And, it tends to work out a lot better in the long run. Conway, there's a couple of questions I want to get to quickly, but in that spirit of providing bite-sized pieces that people can take away today, I want to circle back to your kind of patented, so to speak, approach to crisis comms. You started with two of what I recall as your classic 4 principles of handling a crisis. You say what you know, you say what you don't know, you say what you're doing, and then that last piece I've always found to be the most important. You end with empathy. Can you talk a little bit about empathy in crisis?
Well, yeah, I mean, so you've got the 4 components. First of all, there's 2 aspects, right? There is what to do in a crisis, which is here's what we know, here's what we don't know or can't say. Here's what we're doing as an action now, and here's when you'll have more information. So I'll compartmentalize that. And in fairness, that was something that myself and Jeff Chatterton, who I co-authored the book with, we came up with that together. Wrote 2 crisis communicators, spent 2 years writing a 140-page book. So just, I want you to allow your imaginations to go wild on the behind the scenes. There was a lot of Jack Daniels involved. I'm just going to say that. But there's that. I think what you're talking to, Matt, is kind of the main message approach. So when you get it down to a morsel, and so my approach to developing a main message, and I know Jeff shares it too, is that idea of, I call it an ACE method. And so there's 3 components: action, context, and empathy. And that's what you're speaking to. Empathy, we've heard a lot about it during COVID. Before COVID, it wasn't coming up a lot. Empathy has always been a secret weapon for executives and leaders in communications, externally, but even more importantly, internally. I know a lot of the work that I've been doing during COVID has been helping companies with internal communications and helping communicate with stakeholders and partners and employees, because the media right now is all COVID all the time, right? So if you're not in the COVID game, you're not really dealing with the media much, but you are dealing with a stressed workforce, people who are managing remote work and kids and all these sorts of things. And so empathy has been something that has become a secret weapon. Here's the thing about empathy, though. It has to be authentic. It can't be something, I always tell people the laziest form of empathy a leader can use, and I used to hate it when managers would say it to me at the CBC and I would express my disappointment, was when a manager said, "Oh, you know what, Candace, I hear what you're saying." And then they would go on to talk about what they want. That's just empathy, linguistic laziness. You know, if you catch yourself saying, I'm hear what you're saying, just take your boot off and hit yourself in the head twice, because it's not being received well. Empathy has to be authentic. If you don't have as a leader the ability, and it doesn't make you a bad person, but if you don't do empathy well, and some people don't, pick a different messenger within your organization. Just because you're the CEO doesn't mean you have to be the messenger. You can have other people. The messenger, not to get too McLuhan-esque on you, is as important as the message sometimes. And so you need to make sure that you're picking the right messenger. But empathy these days, not just in COVID, is really, really important. And what I mean by that is explaining why what you're saying matters. Why should people care? You know, again, you know, don't want to turn this into two former journalists talking, but Tony knows in the old newsroom, every reporter every morning is asked one question by their editor when they pitch a story. Why should I care? They might phrase it a little bit differently with some expletives, but it was basically, why should people care? Why should someone give a shit about this? And if you weren't able to explain to your editor why people should care, then you wouldn't be doing the story. It'd be like, well, give me some. So if you're an executive with a company, and maybe you're not in even a crisis, maybe you're talking about a new product that you're launching. Maybe it's not crisis. Let's not even talk about crisis for a moment. You have a good news story and you need to go out and communicate it. Why should I care? Make me care. You care because it's your company, and if it goes well, you're going to make money. I know why you care. Why should I care? Right. Yeah. And so you have to remember always who your target audience is. And it's something we haven't really talked about, but even before you develop a main message, try to really have a thorough conversation with your team about who your target audience is, meaning who are you trying to persuade or influence the most? Now, when you're in an issue or a crisis, my general rule about that is your target audience should be the audience who can make your life the most hell or better. So who can make your life exponentially better or exponentially worse?
Absolutely. We have to get to some of these great questions. We owe it to these folks, but Conway, that's really valuable advice. Let's keep it going here. Candace, all organizations right now in Canada and around the world in many places are going through an equity journey, where we're learning how to live and be and work with one another in ways that are more equitable, provide more equality of opportunity, provide more awareness around kind of cultural contexts that we can be better colleagues to one another and better neighbors to one another. There's a really great question in here from Alexandra, and it kind of speaks to how you manage some of those crises that can unfold in slow motion.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit based on some of the work that we've done here at Communitech, and I know that Conway can probably expand on his experience as well. So again, I think the number one thing that we do is we lead with authenticity. So look at the issue in general, do an internal communication exercise into the organization, see kind of, how people are feeling and what's going on, and make sure that the policies, procedures, and practices that you have are equitable, so that you have that to not to fall back on, but you have that to sort of move forward in the right direction. I think the best advice is to lead with authenticity, transparency, and empathy.
Mm-hmm. And people will see when you care, right? And yeah. Let's kind of get Conway's involvement here as well. So Alexandra, hi Alexandra, by the way, a former colleague of mine from Queen's Park. It's great to kind of see you. Issues like perpetual crises is how Alexandra typifies them. Workplace misconduct, racism, things of that nature. How do we speak to those issues which are truly at a crisis point, in the sense of the word crisis meaning turning point in our culture? How do we speak to those with empathy and authenticity, as Candace says, as leaders?
Yeah, it's a great question, one that I'm dealing with a lot with organizations. And maybe the best way to explain it is what happens when I get onboarded. If a company hires me and says we're dealing with some of these issues, what I go through the onboarding is I go back to their policies and the procedures and the past practices. I say, okay, what is your diversity policy? What are your numbers? What have you done? What actions have you taken? I mean, at some point, guys, a spin doctor can only spin so much, but if you don't have the policies and the procedures and you're not truly committed to diversity and equity, then at that point, there's not much I can work with. I'm not a goddamn magician. I mean, at some point you have to have policies and procedures and practices. You need to be fully committed to equity and best practices, surrounding diversity and inclusion in order to communicate it. And so I typically say to companies, and I've said no to companies, guys. I've gone to companies and they've said, well, we don't really have a lot, but we're hoping you can spin a yarn for us. And I'm like, folks, I'm out. I'm sorry. I value my reputation more than I value yours. So I'm out. I'm not having any part of this, right? It has to be real. And I think that's what Candace said. It has to be authentic. Not it has to sound authentic. It has to be authentic. Guys like me can only do so much. Anybody who comes in and says that they can spin your diversity and inclusion and equity problems that you haven't addressed for years with a news release is full of shit, right? I mean, it has to be real. And that's what I tell companies. You have to get real about this. I can help you communicate actions that you have taken, or maybe you haven't taken actions and you need to mea culpa and you need to go out there and say, no, we have not done enough, but here's what we are doing moving forward. I mean, I can only cook if I have ingredients, right? And so that's what I tell companies. And so I think you have to look inward, anybody on this call, and say, as an organization, if our diversity and inclusion and equity procedures and policies and past practices and our data showed up on the front page of the Waterloo Record or Beta Kit tomorrow, would we be proud of that? And if the answer is not yes, then, get to work.
Absolutely. As Candace and Conway have both said about authenticity, you got to care actually, and you got to try actually. And then there's enough for folks like Conway to work with in terms of messaging. But if we're not caring and trying, then the emperor's kind of got no clothes, and there's not much we can do. I want to move on to a really interesting question. It's kind of a tactical media relations question we've got from Jeff McIntyre, and it's about: is there a universe in a scenario in which just saying we're not going to comment is a viable strategy? And there's a really interesting kind of geopolitical context. And I'm going to be an international relations nerd for a second here that comes to mind for me. But we're here about CEO crisis comes first. So, over to you, Conway, sorry. Is there a situation in which just saying, I flat out refuse to comment is viable?
Well, so it has to be predicated on whatever you're being asked is legitimate. I mean, if somebody asks you a question that is, if it's, one of these questions that is preloaded with bias and not coming from traditional media. There are a lot of people calling themselves media today who are not media. I don't want this to devolve into that conversation. The short answer is yes. But when I'm giving advice like I'm giving today, I have to believe that for the purposes of this conversation that we're having, we're talking about legitimate media and not some person in their basement wearing a tinfoil hat, eating cheesies and yelling at the world, right? And so this has to be somewhat legitimate. So yeah, in reality, yes, there are times when you cannot comment if it's not a legitimate media source and it's some, Nazi publication or something like that. Yeah, we're not even gonna, but we're not talking about that. But I think it's a good question. There are examples. I don't want you to sit there and think you need to respond to groups like that, but for the purposes of today, I'm assuming we're talking about legitimate.
That's right. And as you say, Conway, this is art, not science. The instance that came to me, and I think the generalizable principle here is that I think it's viable to not say something when you're not directly involved as an organization or a leader. And now we actually live in an era right now where CEOs, anybody with a platform, is saying all kinds of things about all kinds of things. That's a whole other AMA for somebody else at some other time. But the instance that came to mind for me was, I remember, and my wife Jessica, who's here, is going to be laughing at my nerdishness here, but I remember when the state of Israel launched airstrikes against suspected nuclear stations in Syria. And George W. Bush was president at the time, and he was asked repeatedly by the media, what is the United States position on this? And he said, I'm not going to comment. What is the United States position on this major geopolitical issue? Not going to comment on it. And that was a way of not destabilizing diplomatic relations as they saw it, which is not a comment on the Bush administration's foreign policy, but it generalizes, I think, a principle, which is if you're not directly involved, sometimes you can get away with not commenting. And sometimes discretion's the better part of valor.
Yeah, again, and like you said, it's an art, not a science. For the purposes of today, I'm assuming we're talking about you being asked about you. But to Matt's point, I think it's a great point. And we can spend an entire 4 hours talking about political communications. That's just the upside down. That's Stranger Things season 18, right? I mean, the rules of political communications do not apply to reality. And so, but it's a great point. So I think for the purposes of today, we are talking about if you get asked about you, but certainly if, it's a great example. Let's apply it to the people involved in this AMA. If somebody contacts you and says, let's say Communitech, and somebody wants to send Candace a note and say, we're looking for a note from Communitech, a statement. Can you guys speak to the business practices of Mars? Nope. Right. I mean, there is some professional courtesy between organizations. And so I do think if you're asked about speaking about another company in your space, often it's because maybe another company in your space has done something wrong and the media is reaching out to you asking for you to shit on them. And that's not you talking about you. I think that's just simply a matter of saying it would be inappropriate for us to speak about other companies. Right. But it's a great point though.
Yeah, it's a really interesting scenario there. Thanks for asking that. Conway, there's one here that I find really interesting, and it's kind of about, to the point about being diplomatic with what you choose to comment on and not comment on. Amrita says, based on past experiences, sometimes the CEO or government minister in these situations that they've been a part of have insisted on being a messenger, but maybe we're not the least empathetic team member. And sometimes those results have not gone that well. What could a person in that situation who presumably is not the boss, but is a team member where there might not be the right messenger and they might know it, what can that person do to make the situation a little bit better?
So what I'm hearing is, how do we manage our boss when our boss isn't the best person for the message? That's a pretty, been there, feel your pain, got the ulcers. It's a great question. How do you manage up? How do you manage up in a situation like this? Fantastic question. I think what I do typically, and again, not a science, but what I do is, versus telling that person what to do or not to do versus telling them, I like to approach it with a series of questions. And one key question is, one is asking, who's our target audience? Okay, so if our target audience is, for example, if you're a government minister and your target audience are, teachers, use that as an example. It's like, okay, that's our target audience. Okay. So if that's our target audience, how do you think our target audience will receive that message coming from you versus someone else? So posing it more as a question, putting them into the shoes of the target audience and saying, how do you think this will be received? Now, this doesn't always work, but it's always better if it's their idea. You know what, Matt, maybe I'm not the best messenger for this, right? And through a series of questions, I find with CEOs, executives, people at high levels, I mean, they are CEOs and high-level executives for a reason, because they make decisions. They make them fast. And that's why they become leaders. But it can be a bit blinding from a communications perspective sometimes when you have someone like that, because their thought is, I'm going to go out and take this one for the team. I'm going to do this interview. Maybe it's not even a good news story. I'm the boss. I'm going to go do this, but it may not be best what's best for the organization. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's stay with this theme of the messenger. So we've talked a lot about the message. The last couple of questions, we've spent a little bit of time with the messenger. Really cool question here from Chanakia. And then after we talk about this one, maybe I'll ask Candace to scan the chat community for anything that I might have missed. So Chanakia's question to Conway. Candace mentioned about being authentic. And you mentioned, Conway, that leaders should stay calm. And so Chanaki wants to know, should we stay calm or should we be authentic? And defend ourselves aggressively in a crisis if we're truly in the right? How do you calibrate calm leaderliness with that authentic human reaction that people could maybe more easily relate to?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer may not be fulfilling. The answer is that every crisis is different. And the reality is, I can't give you a really good answer without knowing a whole number of factors and details. So there's no cookie cutter approach. That's the thing about what I do for a living and what people like Candace and Tony do for a living is there's no one size fits all. And so, just using an example of, an example that's high level, doesn't have a lot of details. I think what I heard though is, how do you best represent your organization? Do you do that, or are you authentic? And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think you can best represent your organization and be authentic. I think it's the how. And so I know this is unfulfilling because I need ingredients to work with, right? I can't make a souffle without the ingredients. And so there's a lot I'm missing here. I will say this though.
I'm not sure you could make souffle on a good day, my friend.
Guys, there's a whole backstory here. We're not getting into that. Just because I ruined a brisket on the weekend, I'm getting killed on it. Here's the thing is, defending is a difficult thing. So I heard the word defending, I think twice in the question. I have an expression that if you are defending, you are losing. Show me someone who can defend without looking defensive. So I think there's a way that you can best position your organization without that tonality of being defensive. And I how do you be calm and authentic while defending? Because people might think defending is being passionate and absolutely, but there's a different way to do it. And Matt used an expression earlier. They will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And, someone can be sitting there trying to defend an organization. And I've yet to see someone really, truly defend without visually and audibly appearing defensive. And it's just not an attractive look. Anyways, I know we've got other questions and I apologize. I think that's unfulfilling. If you want to connect with me offline with some details, I'm happy to, we can have a more detailed conversation if you have a specific example. It's a great question. But it did bring up the fact, be careful of defending. It's hard to do. And then you can think of examples of where that has come off not well.
So I'll throw to Candace here to scan kind of the chat community. And while she does that, I'll say, from a political communication perspective, which has tremendous overlap with kind of business communication, I have never seen so skilled a crisis communicator as the current Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. You see that, situation after situation, and with COVID-19, he's had a term where there's been a lot of issues to manage. Even from a political indicator perspective of public opinion, stuff doesn't really stick. And I think a lot of that has to do with his talent as a communicator. Quick comment on that while Candace queues up another question.
Yeah, I mean, he came out, let's use the pandemic. We know he's had past political problems, but he's gotten reelected. And then this pandemic hit, which nobody had a playbook for. I mean, it hit. And what he did in the beginning is he said, we're going to take action. And it may not be perfect, but we're going to take action and we're going to sort it out later. But for now, we're going to get money into people's hands. We're going to try to do this. We're going to try to do that. And he always did it with empathy. And conversely, so did Premier Doug Ford. Premier Doug Ford, I think, impressed a lot of people during the pandemic by communicating as a human being with empathy. And he kind of got rid of the teleprompter he used in the first year quite a bit. And he went without a prompter and he went authentic. I think a lot of the politicians, and I know I've said it's the upside down, and it is, but I do think, they have shown us the power of empathy and authenticity in communications during this pandemic. There are a lot of different politicians. I know regionally there have been a lot of great politicians who have done that as well. So it's a good question. I think if there is anything to take from politicians, it's been how they have used authenticity and empathy in communications during this difficult past year.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Candace, what have we got?
Yeah, so I'd love to end our conversation. We're closing on the last 10 minutes now, talking about social media. So what I know that I myself have been in this position a number of times where an issue pops up on social media for a brand that you're representing or working with. How do you respond to it? Typically, if we're looking at something critical, is it best practice to take it offline? or address the issue head on publicly on the platform, or just ignore them altogether sometimes.
Again, probably an unfulfilling answer because every social media engagement is different. I'm just going to point out that I deleted my Twitter account after over 12 or 13 years because it just, I got tired of having to shower 4 times a day to get the stink off. But I'm old and curmudgeonly. Candace, there's a couple different ways there that you've highlighted that are absolutely all great ways to deal with this, but there is no one cookie cutter. Sometimes it's taking it offline. Sometimes it has to do with dealing with it in the public domain on social media, especially, I hate to say this, a lot of it depends on who the messenger was. So who messaged at you on Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, LinkedIn, who was it that you're responding to? Is it an influencer? Is it someone with big networks? Is it, someone, squiggly eyes 874, right? Some anonymous, bot possibly who's gone at you. The problem with social media that I've always said to clients is respond measured and respond carefully, because the minute you respond to something, you are drawing all of your followers into the conversation. So somebody may say something and it's only their followers who have seen the engagement. The minute you respond to them, all of your network sees. Now they've been pulled into this, whatever this complaint or allegation or accusation is. You bring your networks into it when you respond. And so I always tell people, if you are, first and foremost, if somebody goes at you on social media with something, take a breath. If you can sleep on it, sleep on it. Don't just immediately go, I'm responding to this right away and respond to it. Because then typically what happens when those things happen and they go sideways is you end up calling someone like me and like writing really obtuse checks, which you don't want to do. I don't want it. You don't want it. But social media is one of those things that, I don't know, it's an important tool and I understand that, but you don't have to respond to something just because someone ats you, right? I mean, you have to deal with every single individual case based on its merits. And I know that's unfulfilling, but a lot of this is so particular to a specific issue that it's hard to just say, this is the magic solution to dealing with arseholes on social media. There is no magic solution. Call Tony and Candace, they'll help you.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if maybe a good note to end on here is circling back to something you've said several times, and then after I get your response on this, maybe I'll toss to Candace to wind us up and make sure folks know how to get a hold of us. Conway, there's been several questions that have come in where you've said, listen, you're not going to like the answer very much, and I would need more information in order to give you a good strategy because it's so much more art than science, and we're dealing with complex live issues. So how do we address that? How do we address the fact that when you're dealing with a crisis situation, it is so much better to have, whether it's your in-house team or your Candace or your Tony or your Conway, already read in and working with you so that they don't need to be briefed when something goes wrong. Tell us about how to really get on the horse and be proactive about managing our issues and therefore managing our reputations as business leaders.
Well, I mean, I'm biased on this, and I truly apologize. I don't want this to sound like a business pitch, because the reality is there are a lot of people out there like me who are very good. So, what I would say is, do you have external counsel? Do you have like a lawyer who you call if there's an issue of legality that is challenging? Do you have somebody who you call when you have legal problems? And if that's the case, you should have someone you call if you have reputational court of public opinion challenges, because quite frankly, you're more likely to be faced with a court of public opinion challenge than you are a court of law challenge. And so there are a lot of fantastic people out there. I know we have some on this call today. Find someone who's right for your organization, agree to a relationship, onboard them in what you do, and have someone at the ready should something happens, because you're not expected to be an expert in this. And, you can't expect your marketing and communications team to be crisis communications or issues managers. It is based on experience. It's based on miles on the tires. But there are a lot of great people who do this, and many in the Waterloo region. And so I would say that you need to have somebody, your call a friend, as Regis used to say on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Who's your call a friend when something goes amiss, or it's an issue that you want to get ahead of before it becomes a crisis? If you sit around and your whole idea is, well, you know what, this is never going to happen to me. I have heard that more times than ever. And, I love hearing that because it paid for my hot tub and it paid for my truck and it paid for, it will happen to you sooner or later. So find somebody or invest in somebody on your team, bring somebody on staff who has that background. I mean, I'm a bit biased. I always like people with a journalism background for roles like this because, and I want to be clear, you don't have to have a journalism background, but having someone who knows how the media thinks, who knows what's going to get asked before it gets asked, these are valuable things. And so, if you value your reputation, I would suggest either invest in somebody on your staff and your team or look for somebody externally, because as I said, your company will survive, but sometimes the executives don't.
Perfect note to end on. Nice and morbid, just the way you usually roll.
I was going to say, this didn't come off as fun as I think we pitched it. I think we really pitched this as like a Ringling Brother. Hey, everybody, we're going to have, it's jokey time with Matt and Conway and Candace. And it's like, we just
it was super
liquor cabinet.
It was super helpful. People are going to stop dropping for their 3 p.m. calls. So I'm glad, on behalf of Communitech, I'm glad you're here as our phone a friend, Conway. Thank you for spending time with the community here. And Candace, how can folks make sure that we stay in touch with them and help them out when any of these things arise?
Definitely. If anyone is interested in connecting with Conway or the communications or PR team at Communitech, which includes Matt, myself, Tony, our colleague Sam's on this call as well, you can reach out to your respective CSM to be put in touch. If you're not yet a Communitech member, there really is no better time than now to join. Members have access to strategic growth coaches such as Conway Fraser for issues management and crisis communication support. And members also have the lucky opportunity to collaborate with Matt and myself for communications and public relations counsel. Those looking to join can reach out to startup@communitech.ca to get started.
Hey, thanks so much for spending the hour with us, everybody. Hope to see you again soon.
See you, folks.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.